Okay, everybody, we are live. We're starting a little early because it is, I guess, technically either is it winter? Maybe it's the start of winter, I think.
It's winter,
So
bub.
it's winter, so it's winter. But in California, never feels like winter. Um, let's start with the lead. And no, normally we start with probably the biggest fight on the biggest network as the lead. We're gonna start with Robeisy Ramirez because I feel like he's now going to be the latest in a long line of boxing fans mocking a fighter for a decision that he made for his health. To basically check out in a fight, call a timeout, some would say quit, against Rafael Espinoza. And I think that to frame the conversation, we have to also frame that the fight happens in Arizona in front of a very macho Mexican crowd. And he's fighting a Mexican fighter who's very macho, who in the fight wasn't using his 6'1" reach. He was brawling with him. He was closing the distance. And then for this to happen right after a clean right hand happening, I don't think it's hyperbole to say I'm not sure Robeisy Ramirez will ever be the same fighter, because when a fighter makes a decision like this, it's hard for me to believe they're ever going to be able to go back to that dark place, because this decision in this fight is forever going to overshadow achievements in his career unless he does something very special.
So I also think it's important to give a little context, right? I saw a tweet from Mike Coppinger that said that Robeisy had a fractured orbital bone, and then that was ultimately the diagnosis of the injury. Now, listen, bro, I know there's going to be people that think he's a quitter and this and that. You know, Tim Bradley can call him a quitter. I'm not going to call somebody a quitter for stopping during a fight because of that injury. That's the same injury that Daniel Dubois had, and we've seen what kind of a fighter Daniel Dubois is since that fight. And it's not that decision to take that knee is not necessarily a reflection of his character as a fighter. And so, of course, for all the reasons you said, the optics of the seeming to make a conscious decision to stop fighting in front of a Mexican crowd, which would never tolerate that under any circumstance. Like, I get all of that, but that's an injury that, you know, is very serious. It affects your vision. You know, I've heard fighters talk about the pins and needles in your face that you have long after it heals, and it just sort of you know, it can be a really serious kind of, not life altering, but it can be an injury that stays with you. So I think it's credit to Espinoza for just being a really durable puncher, for being a strong guy that was able to and maybe there were some elbows mixed in. I'm not entirely sure. I didn't see it that much in this fight, but you know, I just don't feel, me as a civilian, you know, that I'm in a position to call somebody a quitter who has a broken orbital bone.
Shout out to the 17 people already in the chat. If this is your first time checking out the podcast, hit the thumbs up button, leave a comment, interact with us. Jack Kelly said reports came that he shattered his orbital bone. I think that there's a level of unreasonable that comes with a boxing fan. Like, if you got your orbital bone broken or your jaw broken in a fight or just in life, there would be a lot of sympathy for most reasonable people. Like, oh man, that is terrible. What can I do to help? But given that boxing is all of our passions and most people that are into boxing are expert guy of this niche sport, you can't just go up to a random person and talk boxing. Typically, it's not like basketball or NFL where people have basic level of interest or ideas. I think there's a level of greatness and unreasonable toughness is our standard for our sport. We never go from reasonable to that. So, like, in the main event, a guy like Oscar Valdez fought with a broken jaw. I almost feel like that doesn't get glorified enough for how amazing that is. And a guy like Ramirez, who's a long-lasting pro who made a decision to check out in the fight, they're never given the benefit of the doubt despite having 300 amateur fights. And I also think that there's a level of
But Lukey, there's context, right? Like Cal Brook had broken orbital bone against Golovkin, and that was ultimately a decision that was made by either by him or his corner not to continue. I can't remember the exact circumstances of the fight ending. This is not the first time we've seen fights end because of this injury, because of the nature of this injury and what it does to your vision and how it feels to get hit when you have it. And, you know, I try to give fighters a lot of grace in these types of situations just because, you know, the average person is not signing up for this. Now, if a fighter is able to fight with that injury, all the more respect in the world. But I remember talking to Corey Erdman, and he was like, don't fight with a broken orbital bone. You don't have to do that for me. I'm not requiring that of you. You know, like I just I and maybe that I know there's going to be fight fans that just don't agree with me on that, but me being a guy sitting from the outside, I'm not in a position to tell somebody with that injury what they have to do.
I also think the context is key too. This was a rematch of an upset that happened last year of a fight of the year type fight. And Ramirez, in my opinion, was winning the fight. The fight was trending like being another fight of the year. Espinoza was starting to have some of the most success he had had in the fight. And I think because of the emotion of the moment and because the fight was picking up and most people were excited about this fight, the jarring and confusing end to the fight saw Ramirez get some of the brunt of fans who were expecting a great fight. Maybe not unlike how Devin Haney got some of the backlash that maybe people that didn't like Floyd Mayweather, he got some of that backlash when he lost and then it was ruled a no contest because people had been wanting to get out their frustrations on Floyd, so they kind of let it out on him. I think that fans may have wanted to see that great fight continue, and then just kind of the confusing end of the fight where he gets hit with a right hand.
Right, but I just think the idea that we've seen this guy in tough fights already. We know the first fight with Espinoza was brutal. We know Robeisy is not a guy looking for a way out. I just don't see that as this. And I get the optics, of the immediate way with which the fight ended, but I just don't I don't think that I don't think it's a fair criticism to question a guy's heart that we know it can go a hard 12.
And Jack Kelly, the legend, he says all injuries aren't created equal either. Each is its own situation, so tough to compare one another and how each fighter reacts. I also think that there was a level of Tyson Holyfield that I saw in this, where there was a level of, man, this is going to be that friggin' tough, sort of dirty fight that the first one became. And I saw a little bit of that, not quitting, but like, man, this dude's elbowing me. He's punching me off the break. This sucks. Like, I saw a little bit of that in his body language too.
Maybe, and I think that's just the nature of fighting a guy like Espinoza. And I thought that Robeisy, made some great adjustments early in that fight to not be high guard and taking all the shots on the high guard. He was mobile. He was counterpunching really effectively. So there was some really great adjustments. But listen, bro, I just give the credit to Espinoza, man.
Brick Squad said, would love to see Milo back on. He will be back on. We're going to have him for our year-end show, and he's becoming a staple of the Lukey boxing world, especially when we go to the UK. Also, I don't like saying Robeisy quit, but he seemed rattled very early on. He was complaining to the ref a bunch, and I thought he's about to pack it up in round 4. Dakota, what do you have to say? And also, E4 Entertainment said, yo. So, yo back. Dakota, what do you think of that comment?
Yeah, he was definitely looking to the ref on multiple occasions. He wasn't particularly animated about it, but he wanted the ref to know that Espinoza was kind of pushing the boundaries on the rules.
Our good friend and my buddy Shutterworth of the Ring Gang Radio, tune into their show. They run a show Monday and Thursday nights. I love it. It's really good. It's a merge of boxing and hip hop. If you grew up and you're about my age, you'll love the hip hop references. If you're younger than me, you won't, because you probably don't know the music. He said, yeah, he quit just like Sonny did. All that smiling and cheesing just to get stopped.
I just don't see it that way, bro. Sonny didn't have an injury. He basically admitted that he didn't have the fire. I think the context of what that injury is super important, and you can still know the context of that and feel like he quit, but I just think it's something you can't ignore.
Here's a good, this is a really good comment by Brick Squad, and thank you for jumping in today, Brick Squad. You're really helping with this chat. And we're missing our guy Jesus M and a few of our regs, man. So I'm hoping they jump
Shout
in.
out to Jesus M, even though he's not here right now.
Yeah, salute. You always sends us.
Fake Nello, baby.
Robeisy should have just retired after round 5. Turning his back mid-round was a bad look, even if he was hurt. And I think that that's the kind of the statement is the optics of how it went down in a competitive fight. I think it's going to have lingering impacts on the image and the way people look at his career for the rest of his career.
Sure, and that's inevitable. I think there's ways to kind of overcome that in the way that Daniel Dubois has, and kind of just proving that otherwise in other fights. I'm not sure if Robeisy will do that, though. He's a little older than Daniel. He's been in some tough fights here. I'm not sure what Robeisy does moving forward, but it's clear that he still has the boxing ability.
I mean, I got a cool old guy fight for you. Shutterworth said Sonny quit way before he got into that ring. And
That's true.
I do think that Ramirez came in with the intent to win as well, because he smiled when the crowd booed him and it felt like he was really there to win, and etc. Trajectories for both fighters. What did we learn about Espinoza, who we're not talking about at all, which is a shame? And where does Ramirez go? I will throw out my Ramirez idea before I throw to you like a bad host. I like Robeisy Ramirez if he wants to move up in weight to fight Oscar Valdez in a cool old guy fight.
I like that matchup. I think that's a good fight. That's sort of a winner stays in the mix kind of matchup. I mean, I'm not sure what Robeisy does. I think that if he wants to kind of regroup and retool, he still has the ability to do it. But clearly, based on how this fight ended, he's going to have to, have some spectacular performances in order to kind of regain people's interest, or at least people's trust that, he's a championship level guy. Let's talk about Espinoza, bro. I mean, I can't remember a guy being this big and this effective at that weight, coming in at 145 or 146, whatever he did the night of the fight. He's clearly a super durable, physical, strong guy who's going to have a massive size and length advantage over every single guy at featherweight. And Robeisy is a very skilled guy, bro. And now we've seen 18 rounds or so of these two guys, and it's very clear that there is something different about Espinoza and what he brings to the table at this weight. And by the way, he has been getting cracked in these Robeisy fights too, even in this one. And other than when Robeisy hurt him in the first one, he's shown a pretty durable chin.
I think the other thing that I'm looking at with Espinoza is he reminds me of Emanuel Navarrete. Navarrete beat Isaac Dogbo, comes back, and I believe stopped him in that second fight. It's almost like a similar trajectory of an organic out of nowhere Mexican star. And I wouldn't even be surprised, playing matchmaker again, if next year we see Navarrete versus Espinoza at 130 pounds.
He is a star, bro. He really is. Like he did it quick, and you could see he's got that confidence, he's got that poise, like he's just got that thing about him that it's tough to rattle a fighter like that.
I think, like you speak to it, he has this self-belief in himself that he's just a level above these other guys, and it's not irrational. Like, you can tell he really believes that he's the guy. I think he truly sees himself as a great Mexican fighter that's going to be in the same regard as like the Barreras and the Moraleses. And with each win, he's getting scarier and scarier because I think his confidence is growing.
It definitely is. He's growing into the champ's shoes for sure.
Okay, let's go to the main event. What did you think of Navarrete Valdez II?
I thought it was a fun fight. I was a little surprised at how dominant Navarrete was in light of how Navarrete's looked in the last 3 performances or so, and how good I thought Valdez looked against Liam Wilson. I was surprised to see just how affected Oscar was by Navarrete's punches. And I was also surprised, Navarrete is funny, right? We talk about the discipline and the issues and then this and that, and how's he going to look when he comes back down in weight? None of it looks like it bothers him at all, ever. None of it bothers him. And so I think that's kind of one of the things that is special about him, and it works against him at times, but it also works in his favor, where it's like, I don't think he has those doubts about losing, even if he's lost fights. I just think that he just kind of takes it all on the arm, and he's got a level of composure and self-belief that it makes him difficult to deal with. But he was able to hurt Oscar early. Oscar hit him with some bombs that really didn't seem to have much impact. And I'll be honest, I thought Oscar looked a little, I'm trying to figure out the right word. I expected a little more composed, a more composed approach from a veteran like him, I think, is what I'm getting at. I thought, go ahead, Loogie.
I think it's just I think a Brick Squad hit it on the head. I think it's a great matchup for Navarrete. He said, I think it's very notable that Navarrete has looked bad in almost all of his recent fights except Valdez. I think Valdez, even as a prospect, the emotion of the moment would sometimes catch up to him. He loves to give the fans a great fight. He loves to go for power shots. He loves being in exciting fights. And against Navarrete, Navarrete is just the bigger guy, and he can't bang with Navarrete. This had to have been a strategic, very methodical, go back to your amateur pedigree fight. And once those shots, those sneaky shots started landing, Valdez wanted to fight fire with fire. And to me, what I saw was Valdez is truly a blessing to boxing. He's one of these guys who's had amazing fights. He never quite got the stardom I expected for him, but he gave us the fight with Scott Quigg. He's given us many different fights that are like amazing boxing memories of a warrior of his era, but he never got the Mexican trilogy. He never got the great rivalry that he wanted. I think this was supposed to be it, but Navarrete just seems too big for him. And everything Valdez does and his flaws in wanting to fight guys, that plays into Navarrete, where I think Navarrete at times against Valdez looks better than he might be. Because to me, Navarrete looked good, but he also looked slow. He also his body continues to look very questionable at best. And his volume wasn't as high as I remember. So I think that while Navarrete looked good, I think it's important to note Valdez has had a lot of hard fights, been through the ringer, and this is a great matchup for Navarrete, fighting a guy who probably should be fighting at a lower weight in Valdez, if we're being honest. He's in terms of height and frame, but he's an older fighter. And it matches up really well because he's a big little fighter in Navarrete, able to put his will on a smaller fighter.
Yeah, and I think if Valdez was going to win this fight, the one time I felt like he was like really switched on and in a game plan was against Miguel Berchelt, and he was going to have that kind of a performance to beat Navarrete, and it just didn't look like that was in the cards, both with the approach that Navarrete was bringing, hurting Oscar early, and then Oscar just, again, not looking as composed as I would have expected from a veteran champion.
I just think there was a lot of emotion going into this. I think the sport of boxing, for as much as we criticize some fighters not caring, Valdez really cares. And I think that he channeled that in the right way for the Berchelt fight. But with Navarrete, it's like Navarrete clearly has really heavy hands, and he was tagging Valdez clean. I just think of when the mouthpiece went out and he landed right on the button on him, and it was just he broke down an older fighter, and to stop Valdez, to me, told me more about where Valdez's body is at and the durability of him. Nothing about that was about Valdez quitting. It's just he's been through a lot of hard fights, and his body kind of failed him in that moment. And it was tough to see him frustrated in that moment because he's given we talk about Ramirez and all that we talked about there, but you talk about someone that's given the fans too much is Valdez, and him losing this fight. To me, I hope this is close to the end for Valdez selfishly, because I don't want to see Valdez put in these uncomfortable situations. Maybe he does a fight or two, but he's given us a lot. And to me, I think he's earned his right to go out on his own terms, as long as it's not uncomfortable for his health. And Navarrete, honestly, I don't see him as a top guy at 30. I think that the young fighters just match up terribly for him. I think this was just a great stylistic matchup, where Valdez just always, for some reason, wanted to brawl with him.
I agree with everything you said. I think the one thing, of course, as we lose Lukey for a minute, but I think the one thing I would counter is that I think that Navarrete has an awkwardness and a relentlessness to him that will allow him in many cases to overstay his welcome against more talented fighters, I guess is the best way I can put it.
Chat, we're going to catch up to your comments.
Chat ripping.
Chat ripping. Best I've ever seen Navarrete look, Shutterworth said. I think that it's notable. Okay, we already got that one. Brick Squad, it's important to be wary of these mirage performances from fading fighters against a more faded fighter. Baez, Conceição, Wilson, Baranchek, all those fights have been worrying. So that's kind of what I'm seeing too. And I think that Valdez is kind of in the same peer group as Navarrete. So they're older guys that have had hard fights. I honestly saw, even though Navarrete got a better performance in this, I saw a slowed down fighter whose power just kind of was the difference in this fight. Nava looks like a guy who only shows up to spar and nothing else. I mean, I think he trains hard. I think the issue with Navarrete is, even if he diets now, he did so many years of not watching his diet that he's done damage where he's just never going to look the part of a fighter, because I think he didn't take it serious when he was younger. And I think the cautionary tale is going to be, he's not going to have that longevity because he didn't have the foresight to listen. I'd rather see Foster versus Navarrete anyway. Yeah, I mean, I think that's
a great fight. That's a great fight.
Navarrete should stay at 130 and unify. He needs more road work to be more dangerous. See, I'm not sure that it's the conditioning. I just think that at a certain point, like, I think for him, he's a guy that's diet. I think that it's diet and discipline. And even if he sticks to a diet, it's not like that changes overnight. Like,
yeah, he's still got that engine. You could see he's still got that engine.
Because I'm not seeing a guy that's out of shape per se. I'm seeing a guy that doesn't get on the scale and you say, man, that's a sexy dude. And I think that comes from a decade of just kind of doing whatever he wants. And now he's hitting 30 and going, oh God, I can't eat pizza and do whatever I want. And we've seen guys kind of run into trouble. Valdez low-key might be done. I kind of feel the same way. I hate saying it. Some comments we missed: having double vision is a reasonable reason to quit, just like Dubois. It makes you look bad. Robeisy has the disadvantage of being perceived as a typical Cuban flake who can't handle it rough. I mean, I think that plays into it, is there's a little disdain of deep amateur pedigree fighters from fans that don't follow amateur boxing.
Yeah, but watch the first one. Watch the first one.
But do you get what I'm saying? People love to pile on like an amateur pedigree guy and go, well, pro boxing is so much different than amateur boxing. It doesn't matter. And then you look, and most of the great amateur. But I'm also saying most of the great amateur boxing and USA Boxing Nationals are also world champions. Sure. So it's kind of like so what do you think? Kids should just go to the local gymnasium and turn pro and have no clue where they stack up? Like, it's a little bit of kind of like a, you're telling on yourself, bro, opinion, but it's also like a guy that you can tell is deeply insecure.
It's a two guys walk into the room, one guy walks out argument.
Yeah, and it's also an insecure guy that's saying, like, I don't follow amateur boxing and I don't want it to be relevant. So I just want to make fun of anybody that follows it. So whenever there's a guy that people say, oh, you got to see this guy, I'm going to zag. Oh, that guy, Lomachenko, he's not very good.
Yeah.
Like, it's like one of those guys, they're zagging. Everything's telling you this guy's good, but let me zag. Yeah. They liked my idea, the Valdez-Robeisy fight. Espinoza needs to move up. He looked sluggish early. I think Navarrete fight is a barn burner. I'd love to see Espinoza Foster. And Top Rank is going to match Robeisy tough next fight, sending him packing if he doesn't win impressively. Those are the comments. Let's jump to this Top Rank undercard. Dakota, where do you start?
I mean, a lot of really solid performances from young fighters on this one. I mean, I think just if we're going in order, I thought it was impressive the way that Lindolfo Delgado was able to get Mariñez out of there. Obviously, I thought Richard Torrez looked great. Steve Navarro looked great. There was a ton of impressive guys on this undercard.
Let's talk about him. So, like for me, Lindolfo started a little slow as he always does, but gets the knockout. That should elevate him to a good fight, right? If the world is fair, especially given his division. Once again, it's a division where 3 of the 4 main fighters in the division don't fight all that often. Teofimo Lopez, Devin Haney, and who's the other one? I'm forgetting. Ryan Garcia. So given that like Teofimo is the most active and he hasn't fought in since like June or July, that's kind of a problem because then you have a bunch of guys kind of waiting, and then the guys fighting for belts that do fight, people go, oh, well, he's not a big name like we saw on DAZN because the big names aren't fighting or aren't giving guys opportunities. So I feel like Lindolfo Delgado's situation is kind of log jammed just based on that hierarchy of the 140 division as of right now.
Yeah, but there are plenty of exciting fights for him to be a part of. And even if they're not for world titles necessarily, I think that that's one of the beauties of being in such a stacked division is that there's probably 10 different fights that he could take that would elevate his status in the division.
So just going through Torrez, you give him a guy that he's shorter than, and the guy's not as athletic as him, and we know the outcome. It doesn't matter if other guys have gone the distance with that guy, he's going to annihilate him. I really think there's something there with Torrez. I'd like to see him stepped up in an interesting fight because what he's doing is obviously showing if you give him guys that he can beat, he will beat them, and he's stopping them. 3rd round stoppage of this guy who gave us an atrocious fight last year. That was impressive. Any thoughts on that, Dakota?
I really like what I'm seeing from Richard in the last couple fights, just in terms of his game between this guy, the DeWaco fight, and the Brandon Moore fight. But I got to see him in with some modern looking heavyweights, bro. That's really the whole thing. It's the same deal with Jared Anderson. Jared was never going to be the bigger guy when he got to the top, and that's never going to be the case for Richard. And so we got to start seeing him in with modern sized heavyweights.
Navarro, once again, kind of strange broadcast. They were Tim Bradley started getting on that thing about he can't be this wide open going to finish at times. And I'm like, he has this guy hurt and he's tactically coming forward. And yes, he's a young kid who's aggressive. Little bit of a strange call for what I saw as like basically an emerging boxing superstar, where it was like a cautionary tale of he might walk into a right hand, when I saw Navarro kind of seeing the right hand and looking to punch with him. So I think that was kind of a weird call, but that might be a deep undercard deep dive. But to me, everything about Navarro screams like this might be a guy in a title eliminator by the end of next year.
Dude, the variation, the foot angles, his sense of range and his defense. I mean, there's a lot of Bam Rodriguez. There's a lot of Lomachenko. And I don't want to, get out ahead of myself, but there's a lot to like with this kid, man. He's really talented.
He's a main card fighter. There's certain guys that you watch them on an undercard and you know that they're not going to be on that undercard.
He's showing a level of sophisticated where it's like you want to maybe be careful you don't move him too fast, because I don't see what he's checking all the boxes for me.
Yeah, and Javier Avila, thank you for being on the chat. I was very impressed by Chop Chop and Navarro, and that speaks to our other point is Albert Chop Chop Gonzalez. To me, I'd told you before the week, I think he's a guy. I think he's a main card fighter. He looked the part of a future headliner. I think that honestly, top rank LA-based cards in the future will probably be Chop Chop and Steven Navarro on the top of the bill. I think that in the not too distant future, you're going to see Chop Chop in a co-main, Steven Navarro as the TV opener, and that when they get belts, they're going to graduate into being the faces of LA. Chop Chop, to me, I don't want to use hyperbole here, but he might be a superstar. There is something special. I think him versus Bruce Carrington is a real fight in the not too distant future. That's a banger of a fight. I don't know who I'd pick, but I see him at the level of a Carrington in terms of where his star is growing.
Yeah, dude, he's a problem, man, because you could see the powers there. You could see the durabilities there, the defensive slickness. He can be aggressive. He can get on the back foot. Again, like Steve Navarro, there's just so many different tools that he has so early in his career. I also, because it's a guy that would never get mentioned, but shout out to his opponent Gerardo Perez, who doesn't have the pretty record, was clearly outgunned in every single area, but is standing in there in the pocket with a way more talented guy throwing back and trying to give the crowd a great fight. You know, I thought it was a kind of a special performance on his part as well.
It was a special fight. It's like one of those fights that if you just look at the scorecard and you didn't watch the fight, you'd probably go, "Oh, that wasn't anything." But
Yeah.
it really, to me, was an undercard fight that established him. It almost felt, this is a weird comparison, in a different way. It felt like when Crawford fought Bradis Prescott, because you just saw that there was a different level to this fighter. Crawford was an undercard fighter. He fights Bradis Prescott, a guy who pulled off an upset here and there. And there was a level of, like Javier Vila says, timing and distance. In that performance where Crawford beat Prescott, there was timing and distance you don't usually see from a guy moving up to the main card for the first time. In this fight, to me, Chop Chop stole the show along with Navarro, because he was in there with a guy who came to win, who thought he could pull the upset. And he didn't just beat him up with power. He beat him up with technique, skill, timing. It was a well-faceted attack that I think what gets us excited is the same thing about Navarro. It's the type of tools you need to win a world championship. So he didn't just win. Where I get worried about prospects are when you're winning on athleticism, when you're winning on size, when you're winning on power, when you're winning on speed, when you're winning on one trait. Those are the guys that might get beat. But what's exciting about Chop Chop and Navarro is they're winning with a lot of different tools.
They're
And
winning on their mental, bro. They're winning on their IQ. And I think that's really the thing that is the most impressive. The one thing, this is just the one thing I noticed with Chop Chop. I just want to see him mix up the speed and the power on his punches a little bit. Sometimes just the way he's physically delivering his shots is a little one speed. And when he gets up higher, there are going to be guys that can time that a little better. But other than that, man, he's a lot to handle, bro. Another interesting thing I was thinking about is it's like I remember, back when Robert was a newer trainer, sort of like the, retired former champion, he was training more brawler type guys. It was Brandon Rios and it was Margarito. And over time, he's just like accumulated all these really sharp guys that have been able to, do like an iron sharpens iron thing, to where the Robert Garcia like school of boxing is like almost one of the most technically proficient kind of places you could be in American boxing right now. It's a cool evolution.
And I think the thing is, every year it seems like he adapts. So it's never like you can typecast it. Like, oh yeah, this go there and this is what you do. It's like it seems like from the outside looking in, it's a very open-minded place where they're not trying to mold fighters into one thing. Because you look at Chop Chop, he's a power puncher, but he's also really a boxer. And then you look at a Virgil Ortiz who also trains there, and he's boxer, but he's more aggressive and physical. And then you look at a guy like Gio Santillan who fought on the undercard, more of a boxer. It's like there's all these different styles now, like you said, whereas in the beginning of the Robert Garcia Academy, you thought of it primarily as, okay, this is a physical, in really good shape, hard hat fighters. And now I think you're seeing the evolution where there's all different types of guys.
Yeah, but they all have that sharpness, bro. That's really what's so cool. That's the cool part of the evolution, at least for me.
Our guy, Mexican boxing #1 Espinoza beats Naoya Inoue Navarrete the best at 130. His left hand is back, baby. 100% it showed. That's right. Give respect to my fighters, Espinoza and Navarrete, they're beasts. Let's shift over to Richardson Hitchins winning the title over Liam Paro. Your thoughts?
This was a really impressive performance, man. And maybe, if you're newer to boxing and you didn't entirely know what you were watching, this was a guy in Hitchins. He took Liam Paro coming off wins over Subriel Matias and Montana Love, which were fantastic wins. He's a talented, resilient champion who has shown that he's probably in the top 3 or 4 of the division. And through the first half, you could see some of the herky-jerk rhythm of power was kind of bothering Hitchins. But once he figured it out, man, in like the 6th or 7th round, he just completely separated himself from a truly elite level guy, with a jab, with hand speed, with controlling range, with feints, and he just made a really good fighter just look kind of lost in the sauce, bro. And it was a great performance.
Want to give a big credit to his trainer too, Lenny Wilson. Wilson got on Hitchins in between
He
rounds
killed it,
4
bro.
and
He
5.
killed it.
And maybe we should try to get you into that gym out there in New York, because that'd be a good one for you. But Lenny Wilson just kind of telling Hitchins between those rounds, look, you might have won that fight. You could be down 4-0 right now.
Right.
You're not throwing enough. And then what I saw the change was Hitchins planting his feet. So this was, I'm doing that terrible thing where I'm all over the place with my mind, and that's coffee. Hitchins was doing a little to get a lot. Paro was doing a lot and getting very little in that fight, this fight. And you hate being that guy, because that's never a fun place to be. Hitchins was taking small steps and throwing economic straight punches and forcing Paro to initiate. And when he initiated, it was like playing duck hunt. If you're my age, you're just looking for the ducks and you're hitting them. And it was target practice for him. He wasn't giving Paro much opportunity. And the thing that was most impressive about this performance after Wilson got on Hitchins was his level of focus to stay mentally composed and not deviate from a very tactical fight, which I would compare this fight for Hitchins to jumping rope in the gym. It's very easy to get your foot caught on that rope, right? Because you have to stay extremely focused. You have to be in shape. This was like skipping rope for 30 minutes. That's the level of focus I saw with Hitchins. And I think that it puts him in the conversation as the best junior welterweight. In my mind, the 2 best junior welterweight performances I've seen this year, one came from a non-champion in Jack Catterall. The other is Richardson Hitchins. He's right up there at the top of the division.
And by the way, the other came from Liam Paro beating Subriel Matias. So that's the context of the quality of the win for Hitchins.
In the comments, they're not very high on it. Boring ass fight, shake my head. Never want to see Hitchins back again. Jonathan Morales, Hitchins played it slow. Very tech fight from both fighters. Looked too easy. Paro couldn't get to him. But I think
but guys, there's a reason he couldn't get to him. And the reason he couldn't get to him was he couldn't get past that jab. He couldn't figure out the timing. And anytime he thought he figured out the timing, that was when the sneaky right hand comes in. And I think that Hitchins hits just hard enough, like Floyd, where guys are not rushing him.
And I think there's another thing about this too. Hitchins keeps you at the end of his punches. So even if he's not a quote unquote puncher, to get hit by a fully extended right hand or jab really hurts. It's like walking into a ruler. Doesn't matter how hard you punch. If you're catching guy at the end of the shots and he lands 500 punches and he's 100 and whatever some odd pounds, 500 punches that are fully extend are going to hurt. Like, it's just by nature that's going to hurt. And you might not find Hitchins style fan friendly, but it is extremely technical. It is extremely effective. And it is going to be a championship level puzzle for people to solve, because when he gets into his rhythm, it is very hard to break that rhythm. And you're the guy that brings that up with Hitchins, Sky Nicholson, some of these guys, Troy Isley. When they find rhythm, oh, buddy, are you in trouble? Because they just seem to, oh, this is the rhythm of the fight. And then they never have an issue again, because once they find that rhythm, they can set the distance, they can set the tone, and they can make you fight their fight. And what, to say a lot of words, to say a little, what was impressive is Paro's a volume puncher and a guy that weaponizes pace. And by the 8th round, Hitchins controlled the pace, which is, to me, very impressive.
He completely controlled the pace, bro. And he also took every, tool in Liam Paro's offense out of the mix. And when you're able to do that, and then you land 7 or 8 really clean shots, that's how you dominate a round.
Does Lenny Wilson get a nod or a mention for Trainer of the Year for this performance?
He might, bro. I mean, I'd have to, do the math on that a little bit, but he really had a really good performance in the corner. And you can see that Hitchins is getting input from a lot of different guys, but clearly, he's maintained like a lead voice.
Yeah, yeah. Undercard, LeBron versus Pitufo Diaz. Thoughts?
Really high level, fun, professional fight. You got one guy boxing on the outside. LeBron's got great foot movement. You got Diaz cutting off the ring and using veteran timing to kind of capitalize on those moments when LeBron was standing still. It was a great fight. LeBron's clearly a handful at 130. And I think that Diaz has been a guy that's only lost against the absolute best of the best. And I hope that's not the last that we see of him, because I think he fought a really talented guy and had a 6'4", 7'3" type of fight with him.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you basically hit it on the head. It was a fight where Pitufo Diaz, I feel like, gave up a lot of the early rounds, thinking he could tire out LeBron in the later rounds. Which he did, but he wasn't able to cause enough damage and tire him out enough to get the result he was looking for, which looked like he was not trying to win a points decision. He was trying to get a stoppage. LeBron showed a level of toughness, a level of elusiveness, and a hand speed, which I think is going to be issues for a lot of guys at the top of the division. I want to see LeBron in with Ray Ford next. I think that's a good main event fight that tells us a lot about both fighters currently.
That's a great fight. I also think that LeBron is going to have to up his output a little bit to deter guys at a certain level. I just think that, and Diaz is probably a top 10 guy at this weight, but I think that other guys, if Diaz is able to cut the ring off and create body work and these types of opportunities, there were times where I felt like LeBron wasn't working enough in rounds that were close, or in rounds where it looked like the momentum was really swinging and LeBron was just sort of waiting.
Another concern with him, guys, and I guess I'm just saying the thing that you just said, so I apologize, Dakota, for not listening. Guys, LeBron's a counterpuncher due to his fast hands. He has an element where I think he enjoys moving backwards, getting time on the ropes, catching you with big shots. In the Andy Vences fight, he caught him counterpunching. There's a level of that where you meet a guy who can take your shot and isn't scared of your hand speed, and now you just end up on the ropes. And there's a part
and
of
has the skill and the footwork to hang,
So the thing I want to see is, can LeBron keep it in the middle of the ring? Because that habit of him being towards those ropes, I just don't see long-term success at the highest level of this division.
For sure. There's going to be, like Diaz, there's going to be other guys that are going to target the body, and down the stretch, his movement is not going to be as dominant.
I wanted to talk about Yankiel Rivera right now. I think he's possibly a breakout guy next year.
Sure.
Really, really talented, albeit this was a battle of two undefeated fighters. This was probably one of his easier bouts in recent memory, because even though this was an undefeated fighter, the level this guy was at compared to some of his other fighters, it just felt different. Rivera's 7 fights. I believe he's beaten 3 undefeated fighters now. Knockout win. This was pretty much a levels fight. Rivera's 2020 Puerto Rican Olympian. Everything you want. Within a fight or two, this should be a guy challenging for a world title. There are flaws, right? There are flaws. Every fighter has flaws, especially young fighters with less than 10 fights. But for a flyweight to get me this excited tells me he's pretty special, because I don't just get excited about flyweights every day.
Nah, he does. He's got a swag to him. He's got that it factor a little bit, and he's got good footwork. He's got decent power. He's got good timing. There's just a lot of things to like. And he's clearly a guy who's fast tracking. You know what I mean? So I don't know how fast he's tracking, but do I want to see him and Galalia fight? Yeah, I think that's a fun fight.
Him and Kenshiro. Do I want to see that? Yeah.
Sure. Absolutely.
Him against a talented flyweight world title holder that I don't know his name. Sure, why not? That's what I want to see.
Absolutely.
And I think what's exciting for me is maybe it's premature to think like this, but Oscar Collazo's at 105 pounds. Maybe he'll go to 108 next year. They're getting close to the same weights. And imagine a Puerto Rican fight between
He
Collazo and him.
looks a lot bigger though, bro. He's kind of brolic for a little guy.
But I'm saying, imagine if Collazo gets to the same weight as Rivera and we get a Puerto Rico versus Puerto Rico in Puerto Rico fight between these two. I mean, that just feels like kind of like a really special fight. And I feel like that's not too far away from happening, given there's not a lot of depth in these divisions and there's not a lot of fights that make money. So these fights actually happen.
Or, does he at some point move up to 115, which has kind of a bigger talent pool and more recognizable fighters?
That's true. Two upsets on this card, and I think that those people probably want to hear our takes on them. Let's start with Mark Castro's surprising upset. I'll start. I'll lead. I'm obviously biased. I know Mark. He's from my area. I've known him for probably 10 years, and maybe even more than that, but probably about 10 years. And this performance was bad, right? I'll say that honestly. But there were two things that bothered me about this fight. This is the highest Mark had ever fought at, and it felt like Mark doesn't have a weight class that he's figured out that he wants to be at. Because I felt like part of what the issue of this fight was, they fought at, I believe, a 138 catch weight. And it seemed like the power of Quintana being a little bit bigger guy did impact some of this fight. We saw him going backwards, and some of his style is based on being the bigger man, being busier, etc. So I think that we need to start with the weight class as part of thinking about it, because I think there is some truth to that. He was fighting at 130, goes to 138. I think he was trying to do a lightweight. He's always been a guy that looks like he feels a weight cut during the press conference, festivities, etc. That said, and maybe this is unpopular opinion, I think Quintana did very good. I think the fight was up in jeopardy. But in the final round, I thought Mark did enough to edge a really uneventful 6-4 decision. But this is one of those fights where the emotion of the moment, I think, caught everyone. And Quintana, who overachieved in this fight, might have been rewarded for winning some rounds that he wasn't per se winning, but because he was doing better than people thought, I think he might have gotten credited for rounds where I think Castro probably won it if we're looking at things objectively. What are your thoughts on this performance?
I'll be honest, I thought Quintana won the fight. I thought he landed the cleaner, more consequential shots. I thought Mark did not look sharp. I thought he looked like he was kind of pushing his punches. Everything was kind of slow. I thought Quintana was the one who landed the telling shots. I thought that there was a couple times where Mark was hurt. I thought that they got it right, and I was glad that they got it right. I was glad that they didn't kind of let another one, a bad one, slide, because that would have been an easy one to do that with. And I thought that, the other thing was, I thought Quintana was pretty slippery in that Philly shell on the inside, and Mark just looked like he didn't really know what to do with that. And it's surprising when you see, when we talk about high-level amateurs, it's surprising when you see a high-level amateur like this have one of these kinds of performances where he just looks kind of slow and limited. It's not what you expect. So I think finding the weight class is a part of it, but you'd think he'd be more explosive, right? He's moving up in weight. You'd think, having to lose 8 less pounds than you normally would, that would add to your explosivity and your punching power and your hand speed. And it looked like it didn't do that.
Yeah, it's definitely a time to rethink things, because he was one of the first Matchroom boxing prospects that got signed, featured on Canelo undercard, co-main events when DAZN first got into boxing.
Yeah.
So heavily featured. So it'll be curious to see what they do. I'm sure with this, he's going to be put into a real fight pretty soon. What that real, my mind immediately goes to, if he stays with Matchroom, which I'd assume he does, maybe he ends up in a Riyadh season, USA versus Britain type fight, of 50-50. I don't know, but it was shocking. Also on the undercard, Jaleel Hackett lost to Jose Roman. Maybe I'm a super homer, and maybe I just wasn't watching boxing right, albeit I was doing a lot of things last night. I saw a very clear fight in this fight where Jaleel Hackett won 5-6 pretty definitive rounds. This was on the YouTube portion of the stream. And then Roman won some of the rounds, like 7, maybe 8, 9, 10. He finished stronger. Jaleel Hackett also, who looked like he had a tough weight cut, kind of struggled down the finish, and it looked like he loaded up and tried to get punches. But to me, this was like a good, sloppy veteran experience where Hackett might have had a bad weight cut and taken an opponent lightly, and Roman beats him via split decision, which he was fighting a Puerto Rican fighter in Puerto Rico. The guy, I don't know. To me, this one was a little bit different.
But listen, Lukey, the great news is for a young fighter, a loss is not the end of the world.
No, and
it's part of the process. I think that's that's the paradigm shift that's happening. This is just part of developing.
Yeah, so I mean, that's worth noting. I also wanted to bring up one female boxer who I think is really notable. Her name is Stephanie Pinero, and she unfortunately had her opponent pull out last minute, so she fought an unqualified opponent to fight her. She's a women's welterweight. She's 34, I believe, but she's the number 1 contender in the women's welterweight division for multiple belts. I believe Lauren Price's belt. And I also feel like she has an affiliation with Matchroom, might even be signed with them. So I think a fight with Sandy Ryan could be a fight that's made. And she shows everything I want to see from a young fighter in the sense that she has good distance and range, and she's able to weaponize it and be aggressive while not smothering her punches. And I think she's a main card fighter. So I wanted to bring her up because I think that though she was on the opening bout here, I wouldn't be shocked if next year we see her in a fight, and then in 2 years people start referencing her name like that's a big name in the division where we only know 4 or 5 people. So I think it's good to be aware of her because she checks a lot of boxes to me as someone that could come out of nowhere and give someone a real fight and then be a player in the division.
Keep my eye out for her, bro.
Yeah. So next, we will go to Jaime Munguia's return. Jaime Munguia returns this week. I'm not even going to say his opponent's name because I don't remember. He's fighting on ESPN Plus. What are your thoughts about Jaime Munguia's return next week?
Well, it's tough for me to have thoughts on it if I don't know the opponent. So now I'm looking. His name is Bruno Surace, who I don't know. He's undefeated. He's 25-0-2 with 4 knockouts, so he's not a puncher. He's from France, which has a decent little amateur program, but there's not much to look at on this box rec. Staying busy. Munguia's staying busy.
I mean, there's not much to break down, right? But Munguia is the most notable fighter that's fighting and probably the most interesting fighter to most. But I mean,
the only thing I will say, and then I'll let you finish, we didn't know who Espinoza was. So, this could be another gem that we're not aware of him. You never know.
You never know, but I mean, I feel like with Munguia, he's been carefully moved at a certain point in his career. Whenever he's had hard fights, they've moved him back. To me, it feels like this is let's get Munguia in the ring one more time in the year, and let's ramp up to really big paying fights next year.
I'm not hating on him, bro. I'd rather this than you not fight at all.
Okay, so then on the undercard, we got Alan David Picasso. Once again, this is kind of a stay busy fight. It's not a fight that's going to get everyone excited. But more interestingly, Lance Pugmire Boxing Scene broke the news on Friday that Picasso might be Inoue's opponent if Inoue were to fight in the United States next year. What are your thoughts and what do you expect from Picasso, knowing that if Inoue were to beat Sam Goodman, he could be fighting Picasso in the United States?
I don't think I've seen this guy. I saw the highlights of him fighting Hovhannissian. He's talented. I don't know what that would do for Inoue in terms of, name value, but he doesn't seem like a champion that's overly concerned with that part of it. So if this is the guy who's earned the ranking, he's got a really nice record. Why not?
Because I think that I saw a comment where someone was saying Inoue's 2025 might be Picasso, MJ, who we're about to talk to next, and then finish it with Junto Nakatani. And that alone
What a
is
run.
a
What a
really
run.
good run. So, I mean, Picasso, for me, I would say is a solid fighter. He's been a little bit undistinguished for kind of where he's sat in the division. He's been a guy that I think has had a couple of years that have been lateral. He hasn't moved up or down. He's just kind of stayed in place.
There's a lot of
Really,
guys like that.
really could use a big win next week to get him in that conversation. A good win and calling out Inoue and hoping Inoue beats Sam Goodman, which, by the way, that's a real fight. People are overlooking that that's a real fight. I think that that's important. So that's the ESPN fight card. Let's go over to MJ Akhmadaliev taking on what is it, Ricardo Espinoza on DAZN.
Yeah, I think that Akhmadaliev is a top 5 guy at this weight. I really enjoy watching him. He's a very it's part of the interest for me in seeing him in Inoue, as I really would love to see Inoue in with one of those rhythm guys, right? That gets a certain tempo, that takes a certain approach, and it's very difficult to shake them out of that. I think that he's one of those guys, bro. I just think he's tough to shake out of what he does well.
Yeah, I mean it's a classic boxing matchup where I don't think the outcome's in jeopardy, but then we've said that before with him when he fought Marlon Tapailis and he lost that fight, and then that stalled out the Inoue fight that we're kind of waiting for. But he's fighting his first time in 2024. We kind of know who Espinoza is. He lost to Daniel Roman. I believe he's on a 5-fight win streak, but I've never looked at him and been like, man, this guy's going to be the guy that challenges for a belt. It sort of feels like a levels fight, as you like to say, but it's nice to have MJ back. It's a Monaco fight. It's very much optional viewing. If you're a hardcore fight fan, you could definitely miss this fight and just catch a highlight and it'll
Right, I'll watch it because I'm in deep, and I think that he's a super talented, fun guy, but it's not an exciting enough matchup that it's going to catch, the average fan. But I do think he's a guy that should be in big fights. And Tapales is a good fighter. That was a close fight. There's some styles that give guys problems. I see him as a guy who there's not going to be too many fighters that are able to keep up with his IQ.
undercard. Definitely not one of the more stacked undercard. It screams like we don't know what to do with these guys. We got Beatriz Ferreira on the undercard, Chev Clark, and I'd say the real fight of the night is Gary Cully versus Maxie Hughes. That's your undercard. I like the Gary Cully Maxie Hughes fight. Unless I'm missing something, the Beatriz Ferreira and the Chev Clark fights kind of feel kind of like position fights. They're more lateral moves. I think Beatriz Ferreira, it's her first title defense since the Olympics after winning the belt. And Chev Clark's coming off a hard fight. I think this is a little bit of a softer touch. I think he's fighting a French fighter.
Did she medal this year?
She
got a bronze, didn't she?
Think she got a bronze. See, she fought Kelly Harrington, who won the gold. And I know they didn't fight in the finals. So I don't remember if they fought prematurely before the bronze. Rankings were all messed up. They were obviously the two best fighters. And that should have been the gold medal match because they had fought in 2020 in the gold medal match. So I think she got a bronze, but I'm not sure if it was outside of that. So
I really enjoy watching her, man. She's a good fighter. And by the way, just for the record, she did medal. She got a bronze.
So any thoughts on Maxie Hughes, Gary Cully?
I think Cully should win that one. It just, Maxie got beat up so bad by Zepeda, but he's a very crafty, tricky veteran who has managed to keep himself relevant even with several losses on his record. And, but I think we're still figuring out what Cully is. And if Maxie Hughes has anything left in the tank, he'll ask those questions of him.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Next on the docket, the best fight of the weekend, in my opinion, Alexis Rocha versus Raul Curiel. What are your thoughts?
You give me your thoughts, bro, because I don't really know Curiel, I don't think. And it's at the moment, it's a little tough for me to see like what is the direction that Alexis is taking.
So, in my opinion, looking at it as an objective observer, I think Alexis didn't look good in his last fight. He looked like he was trying to box, but he didn't look outstanding. He looked like he's trying to extend his career, kind of like how Kovalev did when he went with Buddy McGirt, where he's trying to do it, but there's a level of temperament that's changed. Raul Curiel is a 2016 Mexican Olympian who's been moved somewhat slow, trains with Freddie Roach, and is a high-volume puncher who I think is going to bring out all the wrong things in Alexis Rocha, and I think Rocha is going to brawl. I think he brings a lot of fans in the local LA market, and I think this is a very hard fight for Rocha because what we've seen in the Santillan fight is he can sometimes try to play to the crowd, gets into fights that maybe don't benefit him per se. I think this is a fight where Curiel becomes a guy, and I think that people's lack of familiarity with him as he fights on the undercards, I think this is going to introduce him to a bigger audience where Rocha might start to fall into veteran tough guy role, maybe like a Gabriel Rosado. That's where I see this fight going.
Yeah, it feels like Rocha has also been one of those guys that's kind of one good win away. And it's always like, which one is it going to be? Is he going to be, a real bona fide contender, or is he going to fall into that role that you're talking about?
Well, it's just, for me, the tough part with Rocha is I love hearing him talk. I love his attitude towards boxing, but the tough thing is he's lost 2 big fights in 2 different ways. He was outboxed by Rashidi Ellis, and then when he went on that tremendous run, I believe he won 8 fights straight, and he was the #1 contender for a while at the WBO welterweight title. Then he was out physicaled by Giovanni, who we've never since seen him out physical someone, which is kind of
except last night, who would, we forgot to mention he stops Frederick Lawson in about 35 seconds.
Yeah, he stopped him pretty quick. Yeah. That's true, so that's true. But I don't know. I just don't. I think that people are unfamiliar with Curiel, and he's a high volume puncher with an Olympic pedigree, and Roach is a good amateur, but he didn't have that Olympic pedigree. So on all levels, I think Curiel's kind of excelled a little bit higher than him. And the thing that for most people is kind of maybe making the fight close is the lack of familiarity with Raul, who I think is going to announce himself in this fight. Rocha, though, tough. I'm not seeing how he can win this fight just yet.
Sure.
I'm surprised that fight stumped you. That felt like a Dakota deep dive.
Yeah, I'm just not familiar with Curiel, so it's tough. It's tough for me to contextualize like what even is the matchup. Is Alexis taking a tune-up? Is he taking a 50-50?
It's a 50-50 fight with a volume Mexican puncher with an Olympic pedigree.
Yeah.
So let me read to you the undercard. We got Charles Conwell on the undercard. We got John Scrappy Ramirez off his loss going against undefeated Ephraim Bowie, who's a really good fighter. We got Marlon Esparza versus Arlie Musina, which is a real fight. Those are probably the 3 best fights on this undercard. Anything stand out to you?
It'll be interesting to see how Esparza responds from, her a pretty shaky loss in her last fight.
You're giving me nothing, man. I'm trying to do the show notes and do some stuff, and you're like, let me give you 5 words. You want to expand on that?
Well, listen, you never know how a fighter is going to react when, they have a relatively one-sided loss. And I also haven't seen Esparza in a couple of years, so it's going to be, I'm just not entirely sure what she's bringing to the table at this point. This is somebody that was once a pound for pound level female fighter that's kind of been irrelevant for a year or 2 at this point.
Yeah, and I'd also note John Scrappy Ramirez versus Ephraim Bowie is a good matchup because Bowie's an undefeated Texas fighter who doesn't have a promoter, and Scrappy lost a fight that was competitive, but he did lose, I believe, to David Jimenez, and that was in April. Long layoff. His trainer, Julian Shoa, raves about his performance in the gym for this fight. That, to me, is a real 50-50 fight in a division that has lots of interesting fights to be made. So I think that's one to watch. And I think Charles Conwell, there's an argument to be made. He's the best junior middleweight in the world. So I think Conwell's always somebody to watch.
I just want to see him in some better fights, bro. We've been talking about this for literally since we've known each other. How you think Conwell's going to get a good one yet? You know what I mean? And we're still in. It's unfortunate how many talented guys. If it's him, if it's Barbosa, if it's Lindolfo, there's just certain really talented guys that seem to fall into the black hole of boxing politics and rankings politics, and their talent at times is not enough to pull them out of that,
And
even
to
if they
beat the
deserve it.
system. Yeah, beat the system. Curiel goes to the body really well. Does that impact your thoughts on this fight?
Sure. I mean, if he's a pressure fighter, we've seen that, you know, Rocha, if you can really bring the heat to him and put him on his back foot, that he's not that effective.
And Boxing Learner says, Oscar Valdez, retire. You have done enough already.
Agreed, brother. I mean, I don't have any. Ultimately, it's his call. He's been a fantastic fighter with a great career. You know what I mean? But I think it would be an appropriate time to.
Okay, now we're going to the marathon section. ProBox TV on Wednesday, which is available on YouTube and the ProBox TV app, has a 50-50 fight in the main card, as always. Jonathan Cardozo taking on Eduardo Ramirez, the main event. Then a guy I love, Katsuma Iksugi, who I believe has beaten 4 undefeated fighters, takes on former title challenger Aston Policia. Luis Nunez, who's trained by Bob Santos, takes on Leonardo Baez. And Dante Benjamin, who was at one time signed with Top Rank, will fight Aaron Casper in his second fight of the year. Eduardo Ramirez, for those unaware, fought the likes of Isaac Pitbull Cruz and Mark Magsayo being his last fight. And Cardozo last fought Adam Lopez on ProBox TV, winning a close split decision. Do you have any thoughts on that fight card?
That's a pretty high level 50-50 fight, and ProBox gives us plenty of them. I've always really liked Ramirez. When I've seen him win, he does it at kind of surprising times, and it seems like he's a guy who's kind of got like another trick up his sleeve. But he has been beaten by bigger, stronger guys recently, and it's just tough to know again what he's got left as well.
Okay. Then we have our guy Salita. You love a little Salita promotion. So Salita is running a show on Thursday. So if you're a fan of boxing and it's Thursday night, you get RDL Holmes Jr. against Edwin Humane Jr. I think I said his name right. And in this fight, Holmes is like, he's tall, 6'2", southpaw, etc. Humane, I believe, has only been pro for 2 years and has less than 10 fights, but he's stepping up to fight him. Holmes is someone I believe that they see could be in title contention, so that's the main event. Then we get the return of Joey Spencer, whose box rec is now changed to Joseph Spencer. Will be taking on undefeated Miguel Angel Hernandez. Hernandez is largely untested in his career, but holds an undefeated record, whereas Spencer is a local guy from Michigan, not too far from Flint. And this is his, I believe, first appearance on a Salita card. They also will be featuring DeVille Smith, who they call the Hitman 2.0. He's a tall super middleweight. He's taking on William Townsell. Townsell shocked people earlier this year on a Salita card, beating Vadim Solom, who was a one-loss fighter on that card. Leon Lawson, who you might remember, his dad was the guy that punched Jose Uzcategui in Andre Durrell's corner. He is the son of Leon Lawson from that infamy. He lost a fight, I believe, on a PBC card. He's going to be on the undercard. And we have Price Taylor, a New York heavyweight, who will be on the undercard. And Carolyn Viri, who I thought had a lot of potential, but she randomly lost a fight out of nowhere in Mexico. So that's your Salito card. Anything on that card stand out to you?
Lukey, I can't remember the last time you said an entire fight card and I didn't know one fighter on the card. And I think that was a first for me. So I do feel a little like a schmuck, but you also just said a lot of names and I didn't know any of them.
So does that get you? You don't know Joey Spencer from PBC?
Oh, no, I do. I know Joey Spencer. He was the guy that fought Jesus Ramos. Yeah. That was like more of a 50-50. and then Ramos kind of started to ascend, and we haven't obviously seen Joey since then. So it'll
Al
be
Bernstein on the
too.
call too. So if you decide to want to watch boxing on a Thursday night, you got Al Bernstein on the call.
It's part of one of the things I love about the Salita cards, bro. I feel like he actually there's like a solid production quality anytime I've turned one of his events on.
Then let's see, what else do we have here? We've got I guess I don't want to go that deep dive. One of my favorite 2020 French Olympians, heavyweight Murad Aliev, will be fighting earlier in the day on DAZN, but he doesn't get his own segment. So then we get our MVP segment, you know, the most valuable promotions, which by
How
the
many
way,
fucking cards are we going to do in one weekend when we have weekends where there's nothing? Then we do one weekend where there's 17 different cards. Bro.
That's what I'm saying. This is a marathon week. So we got Antonio Vargas versus Winston Guerrero. That's your main event. Antonio Vargas, 2016 Olympian. He was knocked out in 2019 and cut loose by Top Rank. He's on his way looking for a title. We got Giovanna Wana Walton. He's on an undercard fight. He was signed by Most Valuable Promotions. He was on a HBO show, I believe, called Euphoria, and he has an amateur pedigree. He's taken on Eric Henley, who I believe is coached by a guy that lives by me that I think I met once. I don't know a ton about him. Big Gerg will be taking on Patrick Maleta, which is a banger of a fight. Gergen Hovhannissian is an Armenian heavyweight. Patrick Maleta probably beat Antonio Morales in a fight on ESPN nobody really watched. Giovanni Estella will be moving back to junior middleweight. And for Dakota, here's one for you to watch. This is one I circled for you. Tamara Theobald, an Olympian who lost in the first day of the 2024 Olympics, the favorite to win her division from Canada, will be debuting at Shadeja Green's weight class with Shadeja Green's promoter against an opponent Shadeja Green recently fought in Natasha Spence. So I think that that's one that I'm kind of looking and saying, that's a little interesting. Any thoughts on this most valuable promotions card?
Well, it'll be cool to see, you know, some more interesting fighters start to develop at the higher weights in the female weight classes at 168, at 175. You know, obviously Shadeja is going to need some compelling opponents, and Claressa Shields has kind of entered that superstar category where she's not necessarily designated or assigned to any specific weight class. So it's always good to just see, you know, another interesting contender start to come up, and Spence is competent enough to kind of give you the rounds.
Okay, then we have, like, why would this weekend ever end? If you love boxing, I guess this is like the best weekend for mid-level.
But this is also what these promoters do, man, is they really they smother their own fucking work. Like, it's just when you put this, especially me as a fight fan, there's only so many fights you can watch in one night. And why, you know, promoters put us in this position to have to make a choice. I think it just hurts the sport as a whole to overstack, you know, specific days and weekends.
So we got start on the 360 promotions card, Serdin Akhmadaliev against Rafael Bekwi. I don't know much about that. That's the main card. But there's two interesting co-feature bouts that I really like. Carlos Balderos, 2016 Olympian, will be making his 360 promotions debut. He's taking on Cesar Villarega. You might look at his record and go, okay, he's got a 500 record. He went on a 360 promotions card in October and beat a guy that was like 7-1 on the YouTube prelims. So that's a guy that has shown that he can
high-level jobber.
High-level jobber, and it's also shown a guy that came in to win, taking on Balderos, who I'm not sure where he's at. You know, his fight against
He's talented. He's
talented, but his fight against Nahir Albright, he didn't show the enthusiasm I wanted to see from an Olympian. He hasn't returned since then. He signed with 360 Promotions. He's had a couple of fights fall through. This is, I think it's a little bit more of a test than people on paper might look at.
Sure.
And then here's the banger. This might be the fight of the weekend. Jorge Maravilo versus Damani Kato Kane. Battle of undefeateds. Maravilo used to be trained by Mac Garcia, RIP, and Sam Garcia out of Salinas, California, near me. He went down to LA. He's now training with Freddie Roach. He's taking on Damani Kato Kane from Hayward, California. I'm curious if they've ever sparred because they used to both be Northern California guys. Damani Kato Kane trains with Arvin out of Kennel Boxing, and he's been in camp with Terrence Crawford and Keyshawn Davis. Kato Kane's only major fight came against Eric Tudor, and Eric Tudor outboxed him and won that fight. This is a step up for both guys, and I wouldn't be surprised if the winner of this fight gets many more fights on 360 Promotions and possibly the chance at a contract, given that this is a 50-50 fight. But to me, this is a 50-50 fight that's notable for a hardcore fight fan to be aware of.
Is this on UFC, the UFC app?
Yeah, off air I'll talk to you because I have a UFC Fight Pass account, so we'll talk because I watched the 360 cards, which are actually like, I get that it's on UFC Fight Pass and that's the only boxing that's basically on there, but the cards are actually good, which is the bummer.
I'm sure they are. They've kind of segregated themselves away from their own sport, though.
It's a bummer because the production is good. Sometimes they have this girl named Pearl Gonzalez who is kind of a tough hang. She seems like a sweet person, but it's like she's kind of living in the moment with you as a fan. So she'll be like, "Oh, big right hand." And that's kind of like my least favorite play-by-play broadcaster, is the person that lives and dies by each punch rather than trying to tell you like our guy Corey Erdman, I think, does a great job at mixing narrative, context of the situation, and the action as it unfolds. And then Pearl has a little bit of that thing. Like Corey's starting to turn into like a Letterman, a Lampley, or even an Al Bernstein type figure, where he's contextualizing moments and making special moments in the ring.
To me, he's like a more he's a more composed Mauro Ranallo. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. So he's doing a good job. And with sometimes in the 360, there's a level of just like, they just let it all hang loose. It's like it's a little Joe Rogan podcast. It's just some guys and girls just watching a fight. We're just watching a fight, and that's fun at times. But then there's times where you really, what was the fight I was watching the other time? There was a fight I was watching the other day. I think it was Katie Taylor, Amanda Serrano 2. I went back and watched it. The broadcast didn't justify the level of fight that was. Like that fight is not going to get the call it deserved. That call needed to be better if we're being objective. And I think that that's sometimes a little tough. So that's my 360 breakdown. And let's see. There's one more. Oh my God, you're not going to believe it. We got one more card. And this card is probably the one for US fight fans most people are going to skip. This is a boxer card, which Dakota doesn't know. He doesn't know boxer. We've been through this. You're not as familiar with it. And it's headlined by Natasha Jonas taking on Ivana Habazin. This is Jonas's first fight since her controversial split decision win nearly a year ago, last January, over Michaela Mayer. Co-feature is Lauren Price. Then we have Stephen McKenna and Vidil Riley on that card. Oh, and by the way, if you're a super sicko, on DAZN, you can also watch Dillian White in a heavyweight fight against somebody I've never heard of. So that is your complete boxing.
Get everybody one more before the end of the year, right?
Yeah, and it's also like, this is like, if you like mid-level fights, this is your week. If you want the big fight, it's your following week. And then we're going to be chilling for a little bit. You're going to get your Inoue. You're going to get your Inoue fight.
Don't schedule any of these fights for January, though, because January is busy.
Yeah. I mean, this is the week that it really feels like there were contracts.
Yeah.
And it's like you have to fulfill a contract by January.
If there's anything about the end of the year that is coming, is there's going to be cops out giving tickets, and there's going to be a lot of fight cards in one weekend.
Yeah, and this just feels like obligating contracts to make sure people fill their obligations. But it's a lot, right? And I do feel like, because it's so much, it's helpful to go through these, because if I was just a guy that worked a job, I would feel like I'd want to listen as much as I wanted to make an informed decision, because from Wednesday until Sunday, you can watch a boxing card live. this week.
There you go.
So there's only 2 days, right? So there's only 2 days, Monday and Tuesday. And Tuesday, at least you get a weigh-in with ProBox. So you can at least get a weigh-in result. What are you watching, Dakota? That'll be the final thing.
I think for me, at least in terms of individual fighters for this weekend, I'm most interested in Natasha Jonas. We know that she's a world-class pound-for-pound kind of level fighter in the female division. We haven't seen her in a while. She's a little bit of an older champion, right? She's in her late 30s. She might even be in her 40s at this point. I'm not sure. And the Michaela fight was super close. It was a controversial decision, but she is a great champion who's been in with the who's who of her time, and it'll be interesting to see what she's got left.
I think another thing I want to add to you, buddy, is on top of these like undercard things, what the freak fight are you watching this week? There's too many fights. What's the Dakota menu this week?
This is tough, bro. I mean, Natasha's the top of the menu. The Salita card is always good for the production value. But yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot of mid-level cards, a lot of A side, B side matchmaking here. It's always good to see Jaime Munguia. There's fights to watch.
So I'll give you the Lukey diet, and it's a sicko diet. Okay, so I'm gonna say watch ProBox TV on Wednesday. It's gonna be a banger. You're gonna get good fights. Watch the Salita card at some point on Thursday. I would tune in for the main 2 fights or the main card on DAZN for MVP. And if you're feeling froggy, jump over to UFC Fight Pass for Damani Kato Kane and maybe Balderas, but then leave. Jump for those 2, but don't stay because I don't know what the main event is. Saturday, Golden Boy Promotions, go to that card. You don't have to watch the Monaco card. And then Sunday, I would jump over to Boxer to catch the Lauren Price and Natasha Jonas fights. But don't worry, if you don't watch them, that's why you tune into our podcast, because we will in some way have the content from that. And that will lead us into next week. So those are my thoughts. Dakota, where can people follow you and support you?
You can always follow me and support me at the Lukey Boxing Show, at the Slip and Weave Podcast, at ITR Boxing on Instagram, on YouTube. Always a pleasure, my boy. I'm just seeing the teddy bear on your hoodie, and that's pretty fire.
Thank you, bro. Appreciate it.